video number 3 in our multi-part video series on unified endpoint management. In this video, we'll go through a brief round of introductions. We'll recap what unified endpoint management means. We'll review the maturity model, phases, and the categories associated to it. And then we're going to take a little bit deeper look at the management infrastructure level 2, which is what this video is centered on. This video in particular will cover a high-level review of what that means to be a level 2 infrastructure and kind of some general next steps. And we'll talk towards the end of the video on some actionable steps that you can take for more information. A little bit about Model Technology Solutions. So we are experts in endpoint management relating to things like security and automation of the endpoints. And we go to market as a project, as a service, and we have an IP group as well. We really stay focused on our areas of expertise. We're a Microsoft Gold partner. So those practices that I had mentioned, starting in the lower right-hand corner with the as a project team, the identify, design, build, deployment phase of technology implementation is generally handled by our as a project or a consulting team. From an operationalization, upgrade, monitor, automate phase, it's usually handled by our as a service team or managed services. And then we have an IP group that creates technology to help fill some of those gaps to optimize and innovate on top of the technology. So what is unified endpoint management? So generally speaking, unified endpoint management is a single platform for management of devices such as phones, tablets, laptops, and desktops. The way we look at it at Model has just a little bit of a different approach to it, in that we look at the processes that are required to support the management of those devices in addition to just the platform itself that's managing them. And so we have these well-defined processes that are molded to your organization's security and application needs to ultimately drive productivity and reduce security risks. So over the last year, we've spent some time putting together this unified endpoint management maturity model. And the maturity model has some common phases in it that aren't something that we've developed, but should be somewhat recognizable. So the 5 phases of the maturity model: the initial phase, where you're starting to realize you have a need for something; a repeatable phase, to where you're early in that adoption, but you have many features that are not implemented yet, and you're lacking standardization around processes to enable further benefits. In a defined phase, you have established central tools. You still have some gaps in management, and it requires a lot of administrative investment. That'll be the next video in our series. In a managed environment, you have that single platform or the single tool for your endpoints. You apply configuration both pre-provisioning and post-provisioning. Your processes tend to still be require a lot of heavy administrative effort, and you're lacking that analytical data, the aggregate of the analytical data, to make some strategic decisions in the organization. And then finally, the efficient phase, you've got that established single platform, you're applying configuration pre and post provisioning, you've got integrated processes for administration, making it super easy, and you have a lot of analytics that are driving the strategic decisions in your organization. So now we'll take a look at those phases and how they overlap onto categories for device management. So we've defined 5 device management categories, including management infrastructure, configuration management, updates and servicing, application management, and endpoint security. Now each one of those topics themselves have a lot of different pieces to the puzzle underneath of it. The bullets to the right-hand side are just some examples of what we're referring to when we say management infrastructure. And again, this video is just touching the surface of what it means to have a management infrastructure in a repeatable or level 2 phase, which is what we're going to dive deeper into. There will be videos on all of the other sections as we continue to release them. Be sure to check them out. This is an example of an endpoint maturity model output that would come from a findings and recommendations report that the roadmap can facilitate. So organizationally, we provide a roadmap assessment, and out of that comes these findings and recommendation reports. And if you notice, it's per category, so management infrastructure, configuration management, etc., by level. So that way you can see where the if you spend some effort in this area, you'll be able to move your organization down the maturity model in this particular category. So let's dive in a little deeper to the management infrastructure level 2. So let's talk about the general state of the union in this phase. So devices may be joined to Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. Users are being managed in that central directory. You have some initial configuration capabilities, but you're not necessarily actively managing it, or it's not kept up to date. So a good example of that would be you have some configurations in group policy or some containers or OUs created in Active Directory, but you created them once and they're kind of there, and people go in there or devices go in there. It's just kind of where they live. So this foundation exists that could facilitate so many other areas of really strategic growth and tool implementation, but you're at that very base level. So as devices, let's say, get provisioned, they go into Active Directory and they get moved to this OU. That's a repeatable phase. You know what to expect out of a device. That's kind of where we're at in the general scheme of things. So some examples of tool sets as it relates to management infrastructure in the Microsoft realm be Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, Intune or Endpoint Manager, and then Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager or SCCM as we know it. Now this is not all of the tools. There's other elements to tools, things in Azure, and Defender for Endpoint is an example, things that we could implement to further along our infrastructure based on where we are with our configuration needs, which we'll talk about later in other videos. In the management infrastructure repeatable phase, some examples of like loose processes might exist for configurations. The infrastructure has a lot more capabilities than what it's being used for. Many configurations or deployments are still very manual, and oftentimes the internal toolset expertise can be lacking because they're generalists, right? In this kind of scenario, one person is doing many jobs, so it's very difficult to understand, and no internal toolset expertise might be the case, resulting in heavy administrative effort. And oftentimes that's because those individuals are burdened with many tasks and responsibilities. They're not just managing the devices. So if you find yourself in that step, some good ideas to look at the next, how to progress from there, right? The first step is ensure that the current infrastructure will meet your goals for the next 2 years. So let's say you have SCCM in your environment, you have Active Directory, and your Azure Active Directory synchronization is happening, so your devices get joined to Active Directory. The synchronization is occurring between AD Sync, AD Connect. Those devices are being lifted up into Azure, synchronized up in Azure, and enrolled in Intune, let's say, right? So making sure that your current infrastructure will meet your goals for the next 1 to 2 years, while you may not have the level of investment in those current tools today, such as SCCM or Intune, the tool sets themselves and the feature sets would likely meet your goals for the next 1 to 2 years. I would also recommend continuing the investment in the management platforms by investing in people or services that leverage the current tool set configuration to keep those platforms up to date and really start using them, right? And so a question that we oftentimes get is, well, we have SCCM or we have Intune configured, but what now, right? What do we do now? And that's something that the report can certainly, the assessment of this roadmap could help lead you down a path from a configuration standpoint. And so being that we're really focused on our management infrastructure right now, investing in people or services to leverage the current tool set and the configurations to keep them up to date is a good next step to get you past the repeatable phase. And finally, begin creating automated processes to ensure more consistent results. And this is with the management platforms that you already use today after the investment has been made in people and services, after you've ensured that that tool set's going to meet your needs for the next couple of years. If you'd like to have an assessment done, the assessment consists of 2 90-minute sessions. A findings and prioritized recommendations report is the output of that session. The process for conducting the assessment is as follows. You'll get a questionnaire to fill out, and then you'll get a list of things or items to be prepared to talk about in the first 90-minute session. In that first 90-minute session, we'll use the data that you filled out from the questionnaire to really drive home where you're at and understand your priorities as an organization and your capabilities as they exist today. then we will part ways and we will formulate on our end a finding and recommendations report in which we'll use the second 90-minute session to cover in detail. And then you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions along the way. And the cost for that assessment is $3,000. If you're interested in the assessment or you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My email address is on the screen and our website is there as well. Thanks for watching and be on the lookout for the next video.